So, I don't know if you guys have realized this or not, but we're currently in the midst of a crisis in CS2. And no, I'm not talking about the lack of meaningful updates, all of the cheaters that only appear in my games and nobody else, or that Goku failed to defeat Majin Buu in Super Saiyan 3 and wasted all of his energy on to return to Otherworld, leaving the fate of Earth up to Vegeta, Piccolo, Goten, and Trunks, while Gohan is still off getting his training from the Kais. No, I'm not talking about any of that. I'm talking about the fact that we are failing right now to produce the next generation of new in-game leaders, and we are looking at an extreme crisis at the role within the next few years. Now, this is not the first time that I've thought about this topic, but I was spurred to talk about it today after watching the latest episode of the Snake and Banter with Thorin, Maui Snake, and Haka. Maui Snake brought up the topic in relation to how we're seeing a lot of star players make the jump to IGL recently, as well as the Snacks to G2 move. And with that, I wanted to give my own take on the subject and what I think we can do to encourage people to try out the IGL role and help it to grow and flourish as we see some of the greats start to retire over the next little bit of time. So if that sounds interesting to you, make sure you guys take a second, leave a like, leave a comment down below, and subscribe to the channel if you haven't already. It helps out immensely in the YouTube algorithm, so make sure you do it. For $5 a month, you can become a channel member, gain access to videos like this the night before anyone else, as well as a shout out at the end of every video. And lastly, check me out on my Twitch channel, linked in the description down below. And with that, let's go ahead and get on with the video. Okay, let's start off by taking a look at the problem broadly. This is my most recent list of my top 10 teams in the world. We may disagree some about the placements, but that's not important. Let's just focus on the big picture here. Within this top 10, there aren't many young in-game leaders, and for the sake of this video, I'm defining a young in-game leader as someone who is 25 years or younger and is not a recently converted star player. Of my top 10 teams in the world, that leaves us with 3 in-game leaders that fit that criteria. Siuhy from Mouse, Kixan from Heroic, and JT from Complexity. That's not a lot, especially when you consider the fact that on the flip side, the number of current in-game leaders who are over the age of 30 is a lot longer. In terms of active in-game leaders, we have Chopper, Apex, Kerrigan, and now Snacks, and just recently that list would also have included Hooksy and Cadian, and on the outside looking in, we still have players like Glaive in the woodworks who will surely make his way back to a top 10 team eventually. The overall point being that the in-game leader role is typically one that is held by veteran, older players, and the reality is that probably needs to change as the game continues to evolve. Players are only going to get older, and we're going to need either new players to transition to the role or a new generation of in-game leaders to come up who could become tier 1 viable. So the question follows, how did we get here? And I think really it's the product of both a cultural issue as well as a developmental one. In terms of the cultural side, I think we have many great examples over the years of both players and fans not valuing what truly great in-game leadership brings to a team. We get so fixated on the production in the server and watching the star players and supporting players click heads that oftentimes we can look at an in-game leader who may not be the best producer on a team, but is doing so much behind the scenes and in the round to facilitate his teammates that we don't see it in the stat line, and then we look at the production and go, okay, it's time to get rid of that guy. Because it's very easy when things are going well to uplift and praise an in-game leader, but as soon as things get rough, as soon as things start to go downhill, people tend to look at the in-game leader first and point the finger. Obviously, the most famous example of this was FaZe ascending to the heights under Kerrigan and Nico, becoming the best team in the world, and then falling short in the tragic final against Cloud9, and not that long after, Nico, IM Esports, steps in and says, no, I will be the in-game leader now, and leads to Kerrigan getting cut not that long after. And of course, we all know how that story turned out in the end. It was really easy in the moment for Nico, arguably the best player in the world at that time, to say, well, I could call some of the mid-round stuff, I'd do it right now, it can't be that much harder just to call the plays in general, and we can bring in more fragging, therefore we will be a better team. It just doesn't work out that way. If you're someone who is a star player, a transcendent player on the level of Nico, taking on the extra responsibility of being the in-game leader truly is the poison chalice. Yet we still see, even to this day, examples of star players trying to usurp their way into the in-game leader role because they think they can do it better. Whether it's been Electronic at the end of Na'Vi or during his time in Cloud9, or it's Yakindar in Liquid, or now most recently, Device in Astralis, and Twists in Team Liquid. And part of the reason this keeps happening is because there's so few options in terms of finding a new in-game leader. You're oftentimes going down a very similar list of names of players that are going from team to team because the best in-game leaders are often locked down in big contracts, or you're trying to find a new undiscovered talent and realizing that talent pool is relatively thin. Which brings us back to the other issue, and that's the developmental side of being an in-game leader. The pleb to pro pipeline is unfortunately just not set up to facilitate the growth of new support and in-game leader players, especially at a young age. The reality is, most of these guys, they come up through FPL, they get noticed by other pro players, maybe they get picked up by a low tier 3 team, they start playing some pickup tournaments, some online cups, things like that. But you're bouncing from team to team. You're not playing with the same 5 all the time. You're not getting the chance very often to work with the same core of players, develop the chemistry, work on the playbooks and the anti-stratting, working with actual coaches or even actual organizations until you get up into the tier 2 sometimes, especially depending on what region you come from. So we end up with this culture of players where if you want to get discovered in Counter-Strike, the best way to do it is just be the guy who's best at banging heads off in FPL. No one's really going to notice that you facilitated a site take or made an insane mid-round call. Most of the time, people are just looking for raw production, and maybe as time goes on, you get more established in the tier 2, then you see players start to make the switch and develop strategically into new in-game leaders. And for sure, there's a resources aspect to this as well, because the moment you drop out of the tier 2, the money starts to go away quick. You're not dealing with established organizations that have huge backings, willing to pay good salaries, and allow the time for roster development and support the way that we needed for new players to really emerge into their primes. With that all being said, how can we try to start to solve the problem? Well, obviously the first thing we can do is be more encouraging of players to want to develop as in-game leaders over being star players. And that's definitely going to be hard because obviously showing the big picture to a young up-and-coming player is going to be tough. Let me try to put it this way. Obviously everyone wants to be the next MJ, the LeBron, the Kobe, the Steph of their generation, but the reality is those players don't come by very often. And for every one of those players that we produce in the scene, there are scores of players who tried to be that great, but fell short and fell off into obscurity. But you know what teams are always in the market for? Good, supporting role players. Those are the players who make a steady amount of money and have very long careers. So if you're an up-and-coming player right now, and you're watching this video, and you want to be the next Simple, because why wouldn't you be? But you're looking at the numbers and you realize, well, you know, not quite Simple production. The reality is, if you decided to step back and focus on being the next Kerrigan, you could give yourself an incredibly long and successful career that you never would have had trying to chase being the best player in the world. And all of that is to say that being the in-game leader is by no means easy. It's arguably the toughest role in the game, but the more we encourage people to try it, the way more likely we are to fill the shoes of a Kerrigan, a Glaive, an Apex. And not too long from now, we're going to need to fill those spots. And right now, it's really tough to do so. So for the last little bit of this video, I want to take a closer look at this phenomena where you see players who are currently at the top of their game want to take a crack at being an in-game leader themselves. Because for whatever reason, it just keeps happening, and I really have no clue why. Because on one hand, it totally makes sense for someone like Apex, who was on the tail end of his career, going down in viability as an entry fragger, to take a crack at being an in-game leader and try and revitalize himself into a new role. That makes total sense, but I don't think people remember that that transition wasn't easy. It took a while for Apex to settle in and become someone who is now a great in-game leader in the world. A similar thing with Kerrigan, where he made the transition when CSGO came out to being an in-game leader, and at first he wasn't successful, took his time to develop, and now obviously he's, in my eyes, the GOAT, at the very worst, the second best in-game leader of all time. The difference between those success stories and what happened to Nico and FaZe and what's going to happen to Twist and Liquid is that it's happening at the wrong time. I have no doubts about Twist's ability to be an in-game leader if he took a few years to practice at it and really committed himself to the role. Someone like Twist has that rare gift of being one of the very best mechanical players we have ever seen, but also has an incredibly high game IQ. His sense for the game is really good, and based on what we know through his time in FaZe, he did do some mid-round secondary calling next to Kerrigan, and now he's going to take a shot at it in Liquid. That's all great on the surface, but the problem is that Twist hasn't fallen off as a player. So now you're taking Team Liquid's best player and giving him all of the responsibilities of being an in-game leader and having to handle an entirely new roster and also having to work with an unproven coach at the tier 1 level. That means Twist is gaining an insane amount of responsibilities under Team Liquid. There is no reality where Twist is not going to see a fall off in his individual play. It's never been done before, and nothing about this Team Liquid roster gives me the confidence that Twist is somehow going to break the mold and be the exception to the rule. So it's really annoying that we're going to lose time of Twist's prime as an individual to him trying to experiment as an in-game leader now, as opposed to Twist maybe picking up the in-game leadership later on in his career 4 or 5 years from now when he starts to drop off as a player. He's still young. Twist is 24 years old. He has so much left to give as a prime player, and now at the very least the rest of this year is going to be tossed away while he experiments with a role he might not be even good at. Ultimately, I do think people are starting to see the writing on the wall. The recent roster mania has shown that there is an insane lack of tier 1 capable in-game leaders, and there's going to be people who try and fill that gap. I just hope it comes sooner rather than later so we don't see more star players foolishly throw away time at the top to try and fill that gap themselves. But hey, that's just my opinion. Let me know what you guys think in the comments down below. How would you go about solving the in-game leader crisis? Are there any up-and-coming in-game leaders that you've seen that you don't see people talking about? Let me know in the comments down below. I'll be down there responding as always. While you're down there, make sure you like and subscribe as well. Shout out to AdvancedGG. This video was powered by them. Whether you're looking for a new energy drink mix or trying out their new and improved sleep formula, if you decide to check them out, you could use my code LIONS10 at checkout for 10% off your next purchase. Shout out to my channel members Justin, Jesse, Furley, Bubblesj, and Dr. Cocktor for keeping the lights on. If you want to join them, you can check the link in the description. Lastly, check me out on Twitch, linked in there as well. And yeah, I'll see you guys in another video. My name is LionHeartZ. Peace.